Welcome to the garden question and answer video that I do on Sundays here on the channel. You can ask gardening questions down in the comment section below this video, and that's where we pick from each week. I'm filming two right in a row. This one that you're watching right now will have been shot like a week and a half ago. So if you haven't heard your question answered, we've been writing the other ones down too. I'm a little bit ahead because where we're heading from here, I didn't know whether I'd have a nice backdrop to shoot like I do here in Wisconsin at Erin's house. And you guys will know that we're at Erin, the Impatient Gardener's house as I'm filming this, because you will have already seen a couple videos. We did a Q&A with her just based on like this is zone 5B, 6A on Lake Michigan's right behind me back here. And this, so we did some questions just based on this area gardening. And then we did another video, a tour video out here. I think both of those will have been up by now. I don't know. We'll be by the time you're watching this, over in Oregon, filming in Oregon. So let's see. The weekly garden planner is $50 off for the entire month of October. You use the code October50 to get that discount if you're interested in that. Some of the older t-shirts are on sale as well over on the website. Let's see. And Steph wrote down, if you haven't heard your question, there's probably because we were a little bit ahead filming here. We had some extra questions from previous videos, and so but they'll come up soon enough. All right, there's 20 or so questions here from this past week. Number one, this person has a dwarf paniculata, so Hydrangea paniculatus, with plenty of blooms this year, but few leaves lower in the plant. Is there a way to remedy? I think it probably got dry at some point. I don't know where this person was, but as in our travels here, everywhere we've been thus far has been extremely dry, and plants will sacrifice foliage for flowers. So they want to set seed, right? That's the, all of these plants out here that are flowering, this climbing hydrangea, or, even this Fatedra, which is completely sterile, still tries to flower and set seeds. So, that's the purpose of these plants, or what they're trying to do. They'll do that at the expense of foliage, to make sure that they, and as plants are dying, a lot of times you'll see them throw tons of seed out, right before they die. They'll put that energy into that really quickly at the end. And so what you're seeing is a plant that has decided to put flowering over leaves based on the amount of resources it had. In all likelihood, that's what happened. So probably some additional watering earlier in the summer when you may not need it next year. I don't want to say that you have to water them. I mean, maybe, but this was an abnormally dry year. And so you will see plants thin down in the base. Conifers will thin quite a bit down in the interior when they're dry. Lots of plants will do this, but they will sacrifice a lot to make sure that they set seed and produce future generations of plants. Do you have to fertilize? ? Several vacations, they encountered the seaweed blob. So if you go down to, this person's in New England, but they've seen there's been a lot of seaweed washing up around Florida. Steph and I saw it last year, and up the coast a little bit, and around into the Gulf, where you get these algae blooms, or these blooms of things out in the ocean. I actually don't know if I don't know what that particular one has been related to, but we see it in ponds and lakes and streams where we get algae blooms and other plant-related growth. You might get duckweed. You'll see duckweed cover an entire pond. That duckweed is often. I had duckweed on my pond at my nursery because my nursery fertilizers were running into. We had super slow release fertilizer because we're trying not to waste any. I don't want any to wash out of the bottom of the pot. But inevitably, you get enough heavy rains, you're going to get fertilizer washing out of those pots and down the hill and across the plastic and into the pond. And then you get things like duckweed and algae blooms and other things that can happen in a pond. That's the nice thing about having a holding pond, though, because I could basically get those nutrients used up before they ended up in, in the public stream or, something like that. But in this particular case, they're just asking, based on observations out in the world, it seems like fertilizer could have problems, and it does. We know that, especially previously in farming, we saw fertilizer really just kind of thrown at farm fields, lots of phosphorus, lots of nitrogen thrown at farm fields, and lots of potassium, because it seemed like more was better. There's a lot more science around that now, and farmers, you know, they spend diesel fuel, you know, to go and spread something on a field, plus the product. Phosphorus is not inexpensive now, and so there's less of it than there used to be, a lot less runoff, and I think we should probably give ourselves some pat on the back occasionally and say that especially here in the United States of America, we've made giant progress in cleaning up our waterways. We were at the Cayuga National Park near Cleveland a few days ago. That was the river made famous because it caught on fire. You know, we know this in our, you know, from history in the country. That river is beautiful now. I'm sure it's probably got some, you know, maybe some lingering issues there, but we've done a lot to clean up. Farmers have done a lot to use less, to try to maximize their crop yields and use less materials. Nurserymen do a tremendous job of using, you know, if I know this Fats hedgerow is going to take me 10 months to grow it out, I can literally buy a fertilizer from Harold's or Florican or one of the companies that manufactures very controlled release fertilizers. That's 10 months, you know, literally it lasts 10 months in the container and then it's done. And very little of it leaches out of the bottom of the container. So really have gotten better in those areas. Now, with that said, a homeowner, you know, this is a big fescue lawn. You won't be able to see lawn here, but there's a big fescue lawn here. Homeowner can just go and buy a bag of, you know, lawn fertilizer and just chunk it out whenever. And I know I'm going on and on. I'm on question 2 here, but I want to make sure that we do understand that when you're throwing out fertilizer, 10-10-10 or some sort of controlled release fertilizer that you're using for your lawn or your shrubs or trees or containers, you know, if you're looking at a forecast and there's a hurricane coming or some big rains events coming, keep in mind some of that nitrogen, some of those nutrients are going to leave your property and they're going to head to the nearest way they can get into a waterway. And so, you know, we do need to be careful with how we're applying fertilizers. This is another one of the many reasons I just use a small amount of organic fertilizer and don't go on and on and on about fertilizer all season long. I fertilize based on observation. If I saw, I'm going to bring up this Fats hedgerow again, if I saw this was kind of not, this is putting on growth at a time of year I would expect it to be putting on growth. It's still warm outside. I'm in shorts here in Wisconsin. And it's growing, it looks good, it's in this container. What would I need to fertilize it for? It's doing its thing. If I saw it slow down, get off color, then I would assume it needed something and then I would fertilize it. So I fertilize based on observation and not on, you know, it's, you know, every 7 days I'm gonna do something. But yes, you don't, if you're going to grow things in containers, you're likely going to need to fertilize them because there's not going to be those nutrients that are available. But if you're putting right plant, right place, you have acidic soil, like your pH is 5.6 and you're putting azaleas into that, or pieris or something that likes that low acid soil, you know, and you've got, generally speaking, things look pretty good in your garden without additional fertilizer, I'd use very little. And make sure again that we're not chunking out bags of fertilizer, you know, right before big rains and events like that. There are places in the country that have blackout times for fertilizer because it's rainier those times of year and not trying to get phosphorus washing into things. But I will say, at the same time, I'm going to pat us all on the back and say, as a country, we have done a tremendous job in cleaning up things that had been different types of practices in the past, but we probably still have more thinking around this, especially I think from the homeowner perspective of, you know, I need to fertilize the lawn. I need to fertilize the lawn without thinking about it a whole lot, where those nutrients are going to go if there's a heavy rain, or if we're just overdoing it in general. Okay. Number 3, Camellia japonica and other shrubs planted too deep and mulched too much. They took it all away. You know, the over mulching. This was in containers. So they had them in containers. They planted them too deep down in the soil in the containers and then mulched the top. So the things were just, you know, up to their necks in material that they don't want to be covered up. They took it away, the soil and the mulch, and they're doing better. Is it best to let containers dry before watering? Would putting in full sun help? Well, I don't know what plants you have in your containers. Well, the Camellia japonica needs part shade probably. So no, I think you put the plants where they need to be, part shade, shade, sun, but we do need to let containers get fairly dry before rewatering them. It really is easy, depending on the soil mix you're using in the containers, to overwater things. And of course, then there's times a year where you might be watering a container twice, twice a day. And there's other times of the year where you'll be watering, it's gonna change seasonally, and obviously by how much rain you're getting and that kind of thing. But it is definitely helpful, most helpful to plant them in the ground, because soil regulates water a lot better than we can in containers. But it is best to let things get slightly dry before rewatering them, not bone dry. So this person wants a ground cover to go under their forest pansy redbud. They bought a big one, and they want to put something around it. They do have access to irrigation. They want something that's lower than about 4 inches or so. I mean, you could definitely, this is the thing when you plant a new tree, is that it doesn't really offer a whole lot of shade, even if you bought a pretty good sized tree. It's typically a few years in the making. So you can plant, it's a little hard to plant shade things under a new tree, even like a good size one, because the sun is going to sneak under there. It's probably going to be a little sunnier than you think, but you can use creeping phlox, sedums. Several of the sedums will remain there even as the tree kind of grows in time. Ground cover junipers like procumbens, will probably work under there. Lamb's ear, creeping jenny. These are more typically for sun, but I think that's probably more what you have when you initially plant the tree. I saw this job years ago near my nursery where a bunch of red maples were planted like soldiers out in front of this big office building. And then they planted mahonia and a bunch of other things that needed shade. Big leaf hydrangeas, which we needed having a little bit of shade. And all these shade things out there. Because in the drawing, there's these red maples, right? But these red maples were only 8 feet tall and only branched about this wide. So they offered no shade whatsoever, and I watched every one of those shade plants die that were out there. So initially when you plant something, you probably need to put in ground covers that are for a little more sun, and then they'll adapt to it. They'll move out from under that shade in time, and then you can put some more shade-loving things a little closer to the trunk if you want to underplant it a little more in the future. That'd be my recommendation. What is the bluish purple flower in our garden near the vegetable gardens? That was in a video that we had shot, right before we had left, that Steph got that question from. That butterfly candy lilac, the little lilac, was probably the one you were looking at. We have all 5 of those butterfly candy butterfly bushes right there next to the vegetable garden. I assume that's the one you were talking about. In your experience, what are the hardiest gardenias? They're in Tennessee, zone 7B. They have diamond spire in a pot and was going to overwinter it in the garage. Can it be long-term in a container? Is a brick wall facing east be a good spot for planting one? A brick wall facing east is typically going to warm up pretty quick in the morning, but it's going to cool off in the early afternoon and probably be a colder overall spot in your garden. Your west facing wall tends to hold a little more heat from the sun, or even on a south facing wall for a gardenia, because the sun is going to track south of you during the summertime and allow some heat to build up a little bit in your protected space. Your biggest issue on the Tennessee side of the mountains for gardenias is that you're more exposed to the wind than we are, so it probably needs to be in a spot that's wind protected. 7B, just because you're in zone 7B, you also have to think about the differences. It was zone 7B where we were, Amsterdam is like zone 8A, but they have way less sunlight during the winter than we do, and it has an impact on some of the leafy evergreens they can grow. Things can be different. So they're in the same zone as I'm at in Raleigh, and I grow a different set of things than they do. We overlap on a lot of things, but a lot of, several we don't. But when you get over to the other side of the mountains, the wind can have an impact. So the wind becomes an issue, even though your temperature is the same as anybody else in zone 7B. So out of the wind, tucked up against the foundation somewhere west or south is probably better. And as far as varieties go, Climbs Hardy has always been great. Definitely let's see, climbs hardy, frost proof, and foolproof. Foolproof is like a more compact frost proof, but those are some of the more reliable ones. A lot of the single flowering varieties are just in general hardier. That would include Scent Amazing as well. Okay. This person has a white oak. They want a nice tall bare trunk. They planted it in May, 3 feet. Now it's 6 feet. How often and how much should they limit up fall or spring to do it? So if I have a crazy limb on the bottom of something, I'll just prune it anytime. More significant pruning on this you might do in the late winter before it starts to leaf out. Okay, so your tree went from 3 feet to 6 feet. I think it'll probably take, it hit the ground running, that's pretty good. I'd probably leave some of these lower branches for now and do this in the future a little bit. Maybe you take 1 or 2 off near the bottom right now, but a lot of folks, bonsai people, leave branches on things for a long time. They know they're going to cut off because it is supplying energy to the plant. So think about those leaves as little solar panels, right? They're collecting sun's energy. If I strip half of them off the tree this winter, it's going to have less of those leaves to work with, those solar panels to work and grow and produce sugars and, do all the things that they need to do. So I might leave a few branches off on a few more years than you think. So limit up slowly over the years, and I just take like 2 branches off a year, until it's where you want it. And I think that will help speed the entire process up. Like if I just take, bunch off right now, I think I might slow the tree down, which will prevent me from doing the rest that I want to do sooner than later. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Alrighty, that is only 6. So let's see. Number 7, sun-loving azaleas. They have some azaleas. Some are planted in sand in the shade, and some in the sun with the clay. Neither are doing well or flowering well. What are the best cultural practices to make them happier? So here, they looked fried about 4 months after planting in the ground in the sunnier areas. So they probably weren't getting as much water as they needed. So some of these new repeat flowering azaleas like Encores need more sun. But when we put them out in the sun, that may initially also mean that they need more water initially. So I think the sunnier space is the better space for them. But if you're planting them in the sun in the clay, our azaleas need to be mounded up some. If you can have access to some pine bark soil conditioner, that's good for drainage, in that clay. But I think that's probably the main thing that set them back and then got you into a situation where you were now second guessing whether they could take the sun that you had them in, and then you moved them into the shade with some sand, which is also dry, and they're just not recovering from it. So a lot of times it's, again, I think they were initially underwatered, and then that's where they got thin, and then boom, here we are in this process. But I would probably replant them into the sunny spot with the clay-based soil and try to create some drainage. Use some pine bark soil conditioner when you plant them, and leave them up a bit above that clay some. And hopefully they'll flush back out from that. Otherwise, just kind of walk away, leave them alone. Know it's going to take a little while for them to come back. This person has an osmanthus Carl Wheeler in zone 8B, Texas. Can they be planted in fall or wait until spring? I would definitely put it in the ground here in the fall. Most of your leafy evergreens. Carl Wheeler is a little more cold hardy than some of the other osmanthus that you might be putting in zone 8. So I'm not going to hesitate to put this in the ground. If it's a leafy evergreen and it's 1 or 2 zones hardier than my area, I'm going to put the thing in the ground in the fall. If it's barely hardy in my area, that's where the decisions get a little bit tougher. I can put it in the ground because the roots would be better off in the ground, and then know I'm going to have to throw a sheet or a blanket or something over it during the winter time. If it's hardier than my area, I'm sticking it in the ground and walking away. But I'd rather get it in the ground in the fall than have to worry about it all winter. Wholesale nurseries that also sell retail around Raleigh. So Adcock's Nursery, which we've had on the channel before, is opens on Saturdays certain times of the year. And I don't know if that includes fall or not. you can check with them. But I know during the spring, and they have all their one or more of all of their plants in a big area so that you can shop through, and then they go and pull the plants in the nursery. I don't blame them for not wanting people to drive around their nursery, because I've had irrigation heads and other things run over by folks trying to shop in my nursery. So that's the way they operate. And beautiful plants. I mean, really, Jeff is, you know, a fantastic grower, and some of the people he has working there are top horticulture folks. And then C&J Nursery is another one that you can go to. There's several others that are open in that general area south of 1010 in the Anger area. There's several nurseries that are open to the public. Some of them are very limited in scope in what they actually have, but C&J Nurseries down there, my friend Camillo, great nursery, good friend, and he tends to have a pretty broad selection, and he buys some things in and flips them too, so he usually has a lot of different material there to sell. How you tell if a conifer is dry? Generally speaking, you'll know they were dry at some point when they start thinning in the middle. They'll do a little bit of that thinning in the fall always, but if it gets excessive, especially this time of year, it was dry at some point. It might not be today, so you have to go check it. The other thing is, I just been staring at things for 40 years, you know, plants. And so like I can tell the, you know, old fashioned azaleas, I can pick out varieties in landscapes just because I grew them and sold so many of them and looked at them for so long. And I can kind of tell when conifers are suffering a little bit based on that same thing. That's really it would be kind of hard to, you know, to tell someone else that. I think it's, if you have a very big bird flying above me, but I think if you have that thinning thing, where you see a lot of browning in the interior of them right now, would probably be an indicator. Now, again, there should be a little bit of browning in the interior right now. This is just normal that they shed a little bit on the interior in the fall. If it seems excessive, it's 20% of the interior of the, you know, it's 20% of the needles, 30% of the needles. That'll kind of tell you that you probably didn't do enough watering this toward the end of summer or midsummer on or into early fall. That'll be some indicator for next year that that's a plant you might want to keep pay a little more attention to. So this person's in zone 7A, New Jersey, and they said, oh no, they planted a sweet autumn clematis, looked great. Now what should they do? So that's an invasive plant. I think a lot of people probably think it's native because it's growing all over the place in Raleigh. It's on every fence in wooded areas and in trees and shrubs, and it's all over the place. If I walk around the neighborhood, we could find you 30 of them that escaped cultivation, growing and looking great and blooming. This is the time of year they bloom. They're fragrant, white, showy flowers, but it is an invasive plant. I'll leave that up to you. I mean, you know, this is the things people don't want to hear from me. But I don't think you taking out your sweet autumn clematis is going to change the fact that that thing is out in the world, and it's going to, you know, it's everywhere. There's no amount. If every single sweet autumn clematis that anybody had ever planted was taken out of Raleigh right now, it would not change the fact that that plant is out of cultivation and it's all over the city. And you know, again, nobody wants to hear that from me. But we don't have enough humans to possibly go through and kill every one of them. And guess what? If we did that, there's more seed in the ground. So it's going to keep coming. So I'll leave that up to you. But you know, I'd probably remove it. And plus, I don't really want to show them off on the channel as part of my garden because, you know, people know it's an invasive plant. But again, I'll leave that up to you. And again, nobody wants to hear from me that nothing we could do about it anyway. But that's the truth. We can't do anything about it. No way we can go out and pick out all the Chinese privet out of the woods. You know, it's out of the gate. It's done. Not saying anybody should be planting Chinese privet, but it won't matter. It really, at the end of the day, probably wouldn't matter. What we have to do is prevent in the future releasing anything else out of cultivation out there. But the things that are out there would be near impossible, you know, to control at this point, unless somebody has some idea, you know, on that. I don't know what that idea would be. And we probably should put our energy into making sure it doesn't happen again, you know. There you go. This person says, when I plant somewhat raised up in clay, sometimes the uppermost roots get exposed. Should they cover them with soil or compost or leave them exposed? I don't mind if I see the top of the roots just a little bit. Those are dead anyway. I mean, if they've been up above the ground and you're seeing them, those are probably not alive anyway at that point. But when I remulch, and I said this, I think in the video, last week's Q&A, I gave up years ago with my guys to burying the plants too deep in mulch. And so I would just let them mulch and then I'd go back and pull it back. So when you remulch your garden, I would just have the mulch just fade out just on top of that root ball a little bit. And that'll help protect it in the future. But I would mulch, but just you don't need this much on top of those thin roots that are on top of the ground. But I don't mind if they're exposed a little bit. The video we put up with Core from Wholesale Nursery in Boskop, Netherlands. He talked about it in that video, that the root balls of his Japanese maples are literally sticking up out of the ground a bit. I mean, you can see the top of the roots, even newly planted ones. It's better to see the top of those roots than see nothing at all, because now at least I'm going to lose this much of the top of the roots. I'd rather do that than lose the entire plant because I planted it too deep. Okay. Oleander in pot in zone 8A, Lake Jordan, on the south side of their house. Should they leave it in the pot or plant it now? It cannot stay outside in a container. That's 100% chance that it's going to die in that container. Oleander is, for the most part, zone 8 hardy, maybe 7B. Some are not even that hardy. Some are very tropical. But if you had one, I wish there was more selecting around oleanders, because when you go buy an oleander at a store in the spring and it's just kind of an untagged, unnamed variety, it's likely one of just more very tropical ones. But there are some selections of oleander that have been taken over the years that are more cold hardy. I just don't think they're out in like the mass market really. But with all that said, your oleander would either need to go in the ground now, and because you're fall planting a very cold sensitive plant, you may need to winter protect it with a blanket if it gets super cold any nights this winter. Not constantly, but the few nights it drops at or below normal kind of temperatures, below 15 degrees or something like that, you need to protect it. Or if you're going to leave it in a pot, it's going to have to come inside. It can't freeze solid. The roots are definitely not hardy. The upper part of the plant's tender. The roots are super tender. Okay, best way to overwinter potted plants outside versus inside. So if you have hardy things and you're going to leave them in containers through the winter, it's best to mass them together. And then maybe the easiest overall way would be to take a few piles of leaves and put it over top of them when it's going to get really cold. So you just put them pot to pot around 1st of November. And then when it gets cold enough that it's going to start freezing the pots, you can throw piles of leaves over the top of them. You could get a frost protection blanket and put over the top of them. But in mass is the best way to protect them. Inside is much trickier. If you're taking outdoor plants and you're bringing them inside for the winter, if you're unlikely to get enough light on them, and because of that, they're going to be vulnerable to being overwatered, having mites attack them, have various issues. So if you can, if it's a hardy plant and you're leaving it in a container, put it in a protected area out of the wind and in mass, and then be prepared to cover them with various things when it's necessary. Probably your best strategy, if it was going to get really cold, would be to take and pile about six inches of leaves on top of them, and then put some sort of sheet or cover over the top of that. And that'll probably get them through the worst. And then get that stuff off when it moderates again. Okay, how is the native garden, ? Do you have any host plants? We already had lots of host plants in the garden, so we plant Asclepias or milkweed. We have fennel, various other things, and we have host plants in shrub world as well. So we have various viburnum that are host plants for things. So that's going to be a big part of the native garden, and the native garden's really going to take off next spring. When people were there for the open garden this past year, there were probably only 30 or 40 plants over there. We have that plus more to go in first thing in the spring, and then we have lots of other things coming, and some I think, a lot of interesting content around that garden going in next year. So when you're there for the open garden next year, it'll be a garden, hopefully by then. This person had a fire chief arborvitae scorched. They're in zone 9A in Florida, and that's probably about the southern tip of where you'd want a fire chief arborvitae for sure. Will it grow back on its own, or should they trim back to promote new growth? Well, it's not going to grow much till next spring. I'd probably just leave it. It'll flush back out of that. That dead material will come off of it. If you want to shear it a little bit, you can. But I'm probably just going to leave it alone. When going back to that azalea question, you know, where they got a little bit stressed because they had been in the ground for a while, and then they moved some into the shade, and then, you know, you start to get into this pattern where you start going, you know, what if I did this? What if I did that? What if I did this? And each one of those moves exacerbates stress on the plant a little bit. So sometimes when something is stressed, my best advice to you is to walk away, go get some coffee, don't do anything. Allow that plant some time to figure it out on its own is a lot of times the best answer. They did move it to part shade, so that was probably a good idea, because again, you are on the very southern edge of where that plant would, you know, probably out of the range where that plant would want to be. So part shade is best, and now just kind of leave it alone, walk away. Our nightlight Camicypris, our gold foliage one in Raleigh, you know, is another one that could potentially scorch like that if I didn't give it enough water during the summertime. So it'd be very difficult in a sandy soil in zone 9A in Florida to not go through times where it may be dry enough that, you know, if you go, and I've said this before, if you go to the beach and you're dehydrated, you're much more likely to burn. So think about that plant the same way if it's underwatered a bit during those peak summer months when the sun is really super high in the sky. Okay, let's see. So let's think about male and female plants for burying. So if you're buying a male Ilex verticillata or winterberry holly, and then you have the female plants for the berries, you know, how close do you need to plant them together? As long as they're in the same general garden, they'll be fine. The pollinators will figure it out. You know, closer probably is good. I mean, you know, probably is ideal, but I think if you put them in your own garden, space, you know, whatever distance I could space them apart in my Raleigh garden would be fine. Okay, I don't think that's an issue. And there we're buying wax myrtle for this, but I don't think it matters. The bees are flying, the flies are flying, the moths are flying, the butterflies are flying. You know, they'll find one or the other. But the best way to guarantee that cross-pollination probably is to put them in the same bed. So this person's in Alabama in zone 7, so you gotta go way north up there for this. They have beds that are absolutely full of rocks. They were placed there. I mean, this was the design of the garden, was just a basic rock garden. Now they're taking all the rocks up. I call this gravel regret. When you make a gravel garden or a stone garden, and then, especially in the South where it rains a lot, it doesn't look as good. It's like one of those things, and I did jobs like this where, you know, we did stone in between paths and things like that, or loose gravel and that kind of thing. It looks so good the day you leave the job. But with the rain and, you know, up here in the north, probably frost heave and that kind of thing, eventually the gravel tends to sink a bit, or the soil comes up a bit, or the things blow in on it, and it doesn't look as good in the future. So again, I call it gravel regret. What is the best way to reinvigorate these beds? So if you got rid of all the gravel and scraped up or whatever you were going to scrape up, I would probably, if I had it to do all over again, I'd do the same thing I always do, which is I put down wood chips, you know, a thick layer of wood chips, and then I'd let that sit for a while and let it break down for a while and rebuild those soil layers that are probably going to be missing after you scrape all this other material away. So number 20. This person has a rhododendron elegans in Memphis. The last 2 years, the bloom's half open in the fall, but they want it to spring bloom. Anything they can do? I don't think so. We're seeing a lot of this, unfortunately, and Steph and I are traveling a lot, and we see a lot of spring flowering things with some open flowers on them in the fall. I don't know why that's happening. I don't know why some of the shrubs are blooming, the fall blooming, late blooming things are blooming earlier. Some of the spring blooming things are blooming in fall, and I don't know. I don't know that there's much you could do about this. If the plant is healthy, maybe later on in its life cycle, it'll figure this out. If it's potentially under some sort of stress where they're sitting out in open space and they don't have enough, protection on their roots, these are rhododendrons tend to be understory plants. Azaleas, almost that entire group is understory plants. They tend to be in light shade, typically. So I don't know if you have them. There may be some stress-related issue. This is in Memphis, is where this is. There may be some stress-related issue that's partly causing it, but again, we're seeing plants all over the place, blooming at odd times of the year. So again, I hope it'll figure it out in the future for you. So ask gardening questions down below this video. We'll pick from those over the next couple of weeks. This one again is being shot super ahead of time from when you'll actually see it. So these are some older questions that we had been gathering up in the weekly garden planners, $50 off on the website. Use the code October50 for that, and thanks for watching.